AI in Action is brought to you by Alldus International, covering your business's staffing, consulting, and networking needs. Our host brings you the leading minds in AI, sharing their story, their success, and their advice. Focusing on fast-tracking you to the top, AI in Action cuts through the hype to help you kickstart your data science career. To listen to the latest AI in Action podcast, head over to www.alldus.com/podcast or subscribe via iTunes, Stitcher, or Google Podcasts.
You're listening to AI in Action. I'm your host, JP Valentine. Our guest today is Jay Cuthrell. Jay is the servant leader for Dell Technologies. Jay, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, JP.
It's our pleasure. Jay, let's start with a background of yourself. When you first got involved in technology, talk us through some of the roles you've held along the way, taking us up to your most recent position here at Dell.
Well, I was lucky enough to be born in a very odd place at the right time. So I was raised in Beaufort, North Carolina. And when I was in what was high school, I had a chance to do an internship that was funded by the Office of Naval Research. And they had a group that used the Duke University Marine Laboratory as a place to do some testing for things like surface morphology, coatings, and things that relate to anti-fouling of nautical vessels. So that if you would think about it as barnacles on the side of a boat, the more barnacles, the slower the boat goes. So one of my first introductions to technology and data analysis and some of the tools that would become kind of de rigueur in the industry, I got those as a high school student. Really, really interesting opportunity I had. The summer was fascinating. The study was called Spatial and Temporal Variation in the Larval Abundance of Crass Ostrea virginica, which basically means what do we know about oysters and what data can we use to describe what that means? And ultimately it did play into what the Navy wanted to know about how fouling occurs on the hulls of their seagoing vessels. So from there, I ended up in college, went into an engineering field, material science engineering. And while that could have been an interesting play for me, I ended up doing more work on the computing side, working in a lab for beer money at the time. And that turned into making lots and lots of graphs, gathering data from disparate sources, putting those together, helping some of the professors, postgrads, and other folks put together their presentations and their research papers. And I'd like to say I sort of had that degree in the back of my pocket, but I actually never used it. I ended up going into more of an IT story, worked for companies like Nortel, had a co-op at IBM, did the .com craze, worked in another couple of startups, flipped that company eventually, took a couple years off. And then when I was talking with some folks about a thing called converged infrastructure that just come on roughly in 2009, I've now been through nested mergers, working for what was called Acadia, that became VCE, that became EMC, that's now part of Dell EMC, which is now Dell Technologies. And that brings us to our conversation today.
Thank you for that. Quite an interesting start. I'm sure it's a non-traditional approach to getting your taste in large-scale data, but nonetheless has served you well and led you to your current role now. So taking a look at what your current function is, servant leader, talk us through that. What does that mean? What does your day-to-day, week-to-week look like for Dell? I know it covers a lot from our previous conversations, but can you give us some insight into some of the things you're responsible for?
Yeah, great question. So the way I would think about it is this. We are a large global organization at Dell Technologies, and we have lots of products. We have lots of engineers, and I'm part of that engineering workforce. So if you think about I think it's 175,000 globally strong that we are. If you think about the number of engineers, the organization right now, just to give you an idea, is rough and tough about 1,000 engineers. And within that, we have the ability to look at trends. We think about it in terms of data sources that come in related to our products, related to the market, related to how we want to transact and work with our customers more closely. The basics are there are a lot of data sources. Each data source has its own life story. Again, I talked about the nested mergers I've been a part of, and some of the products have actually been around for almost 10 years, in some cases longer than 10 years. And so each of those silos of data then contribute into things like data lakes or more commingled data sets. And then depending on the part of the organization and their function, they may have certain needs. And so a lot of what I help with is connecting people informally. So the informal networks of how you would connect a person with a specific either background, discipline, applying what their skill sets are to other individuals that may need those resources. So identifying very high potential candidates to ensure that they are put into the right place to succeed and grow their own careers. And that could mean someone that never had ownership of anything before, where maybe only a contributor as part of a large team. Now you're leading the team, right? So making that jump from you've been an individual contributor to now you're going to manage and lead other individuals like yourself. Make that jump from being a player to a player coach. A lot of it's also involving or interacting with engineers that are going to take on an informal leadership role where they will lead a project, but no one's, from an HR point of view, reporting directly into them. And each of these are areas where I would work with either directors, senior directors, VPs, SVPs to ensure that they get the alignment they would want. In a prior title, I was called a chief of staff. And the idea, again, is how do you surface the talent that needs to be applied at the right time for a need that's been determined by the business? And I always go back to Kuhn. Anytime you talk about technology, it is simply the response to a perceived need. And so, in a nutshell, I seek out the perceived needs and then figure out how we can apply all of our talent and all of our tools to enable the processes that need to be created for the business.
Sounds like quite a complex role, which would have to cover not just anything within data science, but all areas of technology. So I'm interested to ask about how you go about identifying the talent, but to stay with yourself and your role, how do you juggle the requirements of having enough surface level understanding of all of the different areas of current and emerging tech with the relationship management side of dealing with the various different groups? Because there's a lot of moving parts there for an organization as large as Dell Technologies.
Yeah, it's a good point, because if you think of the way an organization can be formed in the past, those nested merges, originally we were an LLC, or a limited liability company, that was formed between VMware, Cisco, and EMC with some funding from Intel. But VCE was a better acronym than VICE, right? So we became VCE. Well, today we're in a highly leveraged matrix organization called Dell Technologies. And so the words that are used to describe what I do, again, converged infrastructure that I talked about earlier, means simply bringing together server products, storage products, networking products, and then taking those and wrapping around them a high quality virtualization experience. And that is inherently a building block for a data center. Those are the tools that are used by our customers to run a lot of the AI, ML, and related workloads. There's a subset of that most people will be familiar with. It's called high performance computing. The primary difference between a high performance compute and a generalized compute is the reusability or applicability of the fabrics that connect various compute and storage resources. And it's becoming increasingly portmanteau. So when we think about navigating that, it is great to have a background in converged. And I've got 10 years experience, so I have an unfair advantage in that regard. But when we bring in a new talent to the organization, say fresh out of even a college program, even if you talk to our HR team members, we're even starting to be more sensitive to the language we use in our own job postings to make sure that if one does not have a college degree, you don't feel like you don't have an opportunity to work for Dell Technologies, for example. And sourcing is interesting in that you can't expect someone fresh out of college to have a background in the specific of our market. Some of the team members we might bring in have never actually involved themselves in a data center. They've only done cloud consumption models where their operating overhead is their ability to put a credit card into a portal somewhere, and then they get compute resources, for example. So when I think through the stories of connecting the dots, it's important that I am able to leverage the experience that I've built up over 10 years, but it's with an eye to understand that just because I have 10 years of experience, that does not, prior performance does not guarantee future results. So I have to look ahead and think about the talent that we're trying to bring in, that we will, ruthlessly go after and market to ensure that we are competitive, not just today, but in the future. And a lot of that can come down to, even if you do have experience, it has an expiration date to it. And so I think of it in terms of, I would love to figure out ways to put myself out of a job. That's sort of the way I would start each morning. How can I put what I did today, what I did yesterday, put that particular function, make it deprecated? What's the next thing the business needs to be successful? And so that's a sort of a frame of reference of how I start. And that's where ultimately the intake for talent, being very specific and deliberate in the word choice and what we're trying to incentivize or drive eyeballs to say, okay, I see an opportunity here. This is something that you can do at Dell Technologies and nowhere else.
It's quite an interesting role, given the investment Dell Technologies have taken to have someone like yourself focus on cultivating skill sets and talent for the emerging products and services that are coming down the line. You mentioned there, talking about your background in convergence and helping organizations transition from traditional data centers into what we're referring to as edge or fog, and to allow them to utilize AI machine learning. It'd be interesting to get your perspective from both sides, both on understanding that transition and then how you go about identifying top talent in an area that's still relatively young in its infancy for focus on machine learning strengths, particularly as you look for people at an entry level and beyond. So from both sides, how are you highlighting individuals with high potential, both internally and externally? And then how are you helping those same people work on these convergence type projects?
As I've moved through being an individual contributor myself to transitioning to a managing leader, responsible for other folks from an HR point of view, as well as being part of an engineering organization where we're going from, say, we've had an idea, now we're going to fund the idea and we're going to hire for that idea. One of the interesting exercises was going through this with some senior directors, an SVP, and even some director level, getting from zero to say, we need 150 some odd engineers. Okay, go. Sure, they could partner with HR, they could partner with talent acquisition teams. We have lots of support through that matrix, but ultimately those leaders have to have a story about the engineer they need to solve the problem that the business wants us to go chase. And what was fascinating is after we did the first kind of round of, hey, what do you think? Put it in writing, collect all that together, just running a rough, basic Python, natural language, and just seeing the reoccurrence of words that really aren't the story we want to tell, or driving towards the particulars. So why not mention the fact that we know we're going to be using something like Python or Ansible Tower, or knowing that someone that understands what free IPA is. So it's the keyword hits is one part of it, but also, for example, do we need to mention the fact that Dell is prepending every phrase, and do we need the word Dell occurring 16 times in a job description? But until you quantify that and show that leader how they could attune their request to be more clear, more crisp, more concise, really driving towards the action that they envision taking place, that's, I think, critical. I think partnerships with HR and talent acquisition are interesting and important, and they can't be a substitute for the leader truly having a vision for the individuals they want to attract. And I think it's easy to fall into well, here's a template, or here's the fluff around the front and the back, your header and your footer. I think really taking time to tell a story is really an interesting point of view. I also look to some of the startups that we fund through Dell Technologies Capital. Looked at their job listings. How are they attracting talent? What language is a startup using? We're not a startup, but a lot of times we think of ourselves as little startups running, so 1,000 engineers go off and build something. That's a startup. So when we think through what we're trying to do in attracting the talent, it's the wordplay, but it's also having the data to back up why that word, why not this word, and making it reasonable and achievable for those leaders to succeed in attracting the talent they covet.
So you spend time helping, team leaders, directors build out, a robust organization at pace, and many of which may not have as much experience in scaling teams beyond the single digits or higher. Focusing on data science and data engineering in particular, just to keep on the topic of AI, as you help these directors, senior directors, VPs, one, formulate a compelling job description while utilizing the information which we know works, but two, screening for potential skill sets or abilities that are not as simple as connecting the dots between keywords. what do you focus on? How do you help these interviewing managers identify the abilities in people, which is a focus area of your own?
Yeah. So one particular area would be is understanding the portfolio that candidate may be bringing forward, and that could be as simple as here is prior art. For example, we have a large AI ML community within the company. So when folks are tapping internally, tapping meaning that they find a role internally that they want to move from, say, one group to another group to do a different engineering effort, the ability for that engineer to reference prior art in the form of either a GitHub repository. It could be something that they have presented previously at one of the AI demo days. It could be something they've done in a hackathon. These were all secondary artifacts, more indicators of the ability to apply, not just the keyword that was present in the resume or yes, I have experience where I have a certification in this. It's the ability to apply it, demonstrate it, and I think the third part is having a venue to present, giving that individual an opportunity to convey to that leader, here's what I can do, here's what I have done, here's what I want to do next. And getting those three parts in a presentation format, quick and easy, I think that gives a lot more structure to the interviewing process. I think it also serves to remove some of the biases. Very, very common. Everyone wants to have, the most expert of experts in a particular area. And then as you're building a team, you start to realize, oh gosh, a great individual contributor, very sorely lacking in team skills. Maybe hasn't developed the soft skills as much. And so while that might be a brilliant hire for a particular function in a project, if the project involves a lot of team members coordinating, especially now in a global remote capacity, we want to also ensure that they are going to, quote unquote, play well with others, right? Because our diversity is our strength. Having a brilliant individual contributor is interesting, but having the ability to have multiple brilliant individual contributors combining forces together, that's a lot more enticing.
And that's probably one of the key bottlenecks to scaling, particularly within engineering, is getting that balance right and not sacrificing one genius for the greater good of the team. So I think you've touched on a really important point. I want to finish on getting your perspective and helping people listening understand what it's actually like in Dell Technologies, because well-known brand name, but when you think about the innovations happening in AI, machine learning, and the transition and data centers, there's a lot of exciting things going on at Dell that people may not be aware of. And I think it'd be good to finish on that, to give individuals some insight. It's some of the incredible things going on that they may not be as aware of.
Yes. So I'll start with a couple of examples. The first is, not to make it a commercial for another company, but we have a Splunk Center of Excellence. And so within that, all of the people that are champions for Splunk, they come together, they present, they show their findings. And that could be everything from the deep inner workings of Dell Digital, which is our IT organization, all the way through to what's being done with customers. What are we doing for our customers with Splunk as a technology on top of Dell Technology solutions? So again, Dell makes servers, we make storage, we make networking fabrics, we have VMware virtualization. And being able to show and traffic in those stories is one part of the infrastructure side of the organization for Dell Technologies. And then a lot of team members that are now part of called Client Solutions Group, or CSG. That's the more familiar Dell brand. I think most of the listeners may be aware of if they've ever had a Dell laptop or they've used any of the client touch point peripherals that Dell is so well known for. And I think that's the important point, is Dell Technologies as a company has both infrastructure things that occur in the data center. We also have IoT and edge gateways within ruggedized environments where you have in-situ data collection, whether it's oil rigs or mining operations or things happening in smart cities. We have various solution stacks in those spaces. And then, of course, everyone knows about laptops and everyone knows about peripherals that enable the client-side experience. But all of those are underneath one roof. And when you include VMware and the increasing portmanteau, use that word again, world of clouds, you had what was called private cloud and public cloud for maybe 10 years ago, is now increasingly multi-cloud or hybrid cloud model. And that's a lot of data. And if there's anything seductive about IT in general, it's the ability to generate tons and tons of logging events and and you look at the startup community, or our partners who we work with, Moogsoft, who your listeners are probably familiar with, Noodle AI, GraphCore, if you're interested in the silicon, specific side of things, people doing cancer research like IBEX, really applying, and they're using Dell Technologies to enable those stories. It is, if anything, it can be intimidating because it's like going into a place that has like 145 flavors of ice cream. Which one do you pick? But at the end of the day, if you're at Dell, it's still ice cream. Enjoy it.
I think that's the perfect way to finish. Jay, this has been amazing. Thank you so much for talking us through everything that's going on at Dell Tech. Very exciting.
Thank you, JP.
I appreciate the insight. And I look forward to speaking with you again soon and hearing what's going on.
Cheers.
AI in Action is brought to you by Alldus International, covering your business's staffing, consulting, and networking needs. Alldus offer an exec search program. Alldus can help you discover how data science and AI can transform your company. With our unrivaled network of C-suite executives and senior AI professionals, we offer retained search services across the US and Europe. For more information, contact mark@alldus.com. Get the Alldus advantage. Become a member of the Alldus community and enjoy some of the following: AI meetups. Once a month, our community gathers to listen to some of the leading experts in the world of data science and AI. Our speakers come from all over the world, including Dublin, Boston, and Frankfurt. We also have our AI mentors. Our experts will provide mentoring to Alldus members. And don't forget our AI in Action podcast. Each week we have guests from all over the world talking us through their education, career, and more. Become an Alldus member and get the Alldus advantage. For more information and to sign up for our newsletter, log on to www.alldus.com. That's www.alldus.com. Alldus International, empowering through AI.